Welcome everybody to this VicTESOL session, the title of which is Not Just Surviving but Thriving, Preparing for Your First Year of Teaching in an EAL Classroom. I'm Shem McDonald and I'm from VicTESOL, and I'm very happy to welcome everybody here today. And to start with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm joining you, the people of the Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations. I pay my respect to their elders, both past and present. And I extend this acknowledgement to traditional owners and elders of the country on which you are joining this seminar today. I'd also like to acknowledge any participants in today's session who are themselves Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islanders. I acknowledge the rich lessons that we as educators can learn from Aboriginal people who have created and maintained links through language and culture that have lasted for many thousands of years and which continue today. In a minute, I'm going to introduce the host and the panelists for today. But before that, just a couple of directions about how we're going to manage the interactions in today's webinar. You'll notice that a poll has appeared on your screen, which we'd like you to fill out now if you could, and we'll look at the results of that poll just to get a sense of who's in the session today. So if you could do that while I'm talking, that would be great. Our webinar today is set up so that you can use the Q&A features. We don't have microphones available to participants because there's a large number of you, so that will help us manage the session smoothly. Towards the end of the session, the presenters will respond to a selection of questions that have been that will appear in the Q&A, and we'll read those out. So what we'd suggest you do is to read the questions that come up in the Q&A, and if there are any questions there that you like or the ones that you had, please upvote those questions using the thumbs up icon, and that will promote the question. It will move to the top and it will increase the likelihood that we'll be able to respond to it towards the end of the session. If you have any questions or you want to make any other comments, if you've got any comments or if you've got any questions relating to technical difficulties, please post those in the chat. Okay, so you've got the chat and the Q&A functions available to you for those different functions. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our host and panelists for today. Today we have Ms. Sanam Maner, who is from Melbourne Polytechnic, and she's also an initial teacher education student at Trobe University. We've got Laurence Guttmann, who is from Western English Language School. We have Rosemary Abboud, who's from Dandenong North School. We have Margaret from Carringbush Adult Education, and we've got Julia Lippold, who's from Lauriston School. So welcome to our hosts and our panelists, and I will hand over to Sanam.
Thank you, Shem.
Sorry. I'll look at the host, the results now. So the results for the questions have come up on your screen, and you can see there that the response to the first question, what point are you at in your teaching career? So we've got quite a few people saying they're about to graduate, 38%. A couple have just started, 13. Currently in their first year of teaching, 13. A few experienced EAL teachers, 10. A school leader, 2%, and 25% of people in the other category. The second question, sectors you are interested in teaching or are actually teaching in: primary, 50%, secondary just a bit over that half, 52, and adult, 27. So obviously there's a bit of overlap there, people working in a couple of sectors. And the topics people are most interested in learning about, they're listed there. We've got 71% saying they're interested in teaching language. Okay, I guess that makes sense. And we've got high numbers for most of the others, 63% for resources, and the others are in their 50, finding employment 46. So they're all fairly high responses. So thank you for that. That gives us a bit of a sense of who you are and what you're interested in for the session. Okay, over to you, Sanam.
Thanks, Shem. Hi, everyone. So yeah, we just thought that a good way of introducing you all is to ask you about your first year of teaching. Can you just tell us a bit about your first year of teaching and one thing that you learned about teaching in your first year?
Okay, I'll go first.
All right, thanks, Laurence.
Yeah. So I first taught for a year in France before I was a teacher, a real teacher anyway, trained teacher. I had 2 days of teacher training in Paris before they sent me off to some French primary schools. And I learnt a few things. I learnt that I really like teaching, so that was good. I learnt that it's maybe a cliche, but you know, the knowledge that you need or that you acquire through teaching is really infinite. Every day is different. I would say that, you know, you could say that about many things, but it's really, really true for teaching, because there's just so many different parts to the craft, and then there's so many different parts to your students as well. And finally, I learned that I didn't really like teaching primary kids. And I'm a secondary teacher now.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Laurence. And
I'll go next if you like. I first started teaching in a mainstream classroom, so just normal grade 1-2 primary, outside of Melbourne. And I wasn't really sure about wanting to teach in the primary sector. I actually started in the primary sector. I always thought that perhaps I wanted to go work with adults, but after that first year, I found that I had a real passion for working with primary school age children. And I suppose one of the things that I really learned in my first year, I had a very interesting principal who sat me down and said, as a graduate teacher, I don't expect to see you sitting in your classroom during APT. That's what it was called back then when we had time release. He suggested that it would be a really good idea to go out and see what was happening in other classrooms and learn from other teachers in the classrooms. Just go for a wander, see what people are doing in their room and see what you can use. And to this day, 30 odd years later, I think I say that to everybody. Getting out and looking and seeing what's happening in other classrooms is just such wonderful PD for yourself that you can get for free and within your own school. And that was one of the major things that I really learned from my first year. And just to have fun, really, with the children. Show them that you've got a passion for learning and that it's an enjoyable thing, and they will come along with you on that journey.
thanks, Rosemary. Just can I just ask you, so if we do that with colleagues and go to someone else's class, is there a particular sort of etiquette, or do we check in a particular way? Is everyone open to it?
Currently at the school that I'm at, we actually have an observation program. So it's part of our professional development that we attend. I think we do 2 hours of observation in colleagues' classrooms. So generally what you do is you just make a time, approach someone that you think that you would like to view and see what they're doing in their room, and you set up a time and then you go in and watch them. So that's probably the best way to go about it. Occasionally I'll say to people, because I also go into classrooms to view other students, I might see things up and around, and so even to this day I'll say to teachers, I really love what you've done up here. Could I come back with my phone and take a picture of it, or what did you do here? And people are really happy, I think, to share. As teachers, we're happy to share with others, I think. So, but yes, but the best thing is probably, first of all, is to approach the person that you want to go in to see, and just make sure that they're comfortable with you coming in.
Right, thank you.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. Whilst I'm working with adults now, I started out as a secondary teacher, and I can remember being incredibly tired in my first year. It was a lot of hard work. I remember getting to Friday night and being dead on my feet. So it is work. You've got no bag of tricks in your head to start off with. You develop that bag as you go, and it takes time. But it's quite exciting, I think, being a first year teacher, and learn as much as you can. And you don't learn, I take Rosemary's point there, you don't really learn so much just looking at your own self. If you can talk to others, observe others wherever you can, is a fabulous idea. You really do learn a lot from others. You just pick up little things as the time goes on, and then you get more and more tricks in your mind to go forward with. Yeah, so enjoy it, but you will work. Mm.
Thanks, Margaret. And Julia?
Yeah, I really echo a lot of the sentiments from Laurence and Rosemary and Marg. I was incredibly fortunate that in my first year of teaching, I secured a position at Blackburn English Language School. And to this day, all of the foundations of my teaching I acquired basically in my 8 years that I spent at Blackburn English Language School. It was an incredibly eye-opening experience for me. I came in fresh-faced, even though I had been working with refugee students in after-school tutoring style programs, and I'd taught in Korea for a teaching placement. It really wasn't until I got on the ground and in the classroom that my eyes were opened. And my advice would be to not have any preconceived ideas about students' backgrounds or their experiences. Get to know the students, hear their stories from them. Which is really important. I spent a lot of my first year laminating. I think I ended up with hot fingers from having to laminate and create so many resources, but I was fortunate that there was another graduate teacher who was employed at the same year as me, and we became really firm friends. So my advice is really to find your people. I found my people at Blackburn English Language School, and give it a go, give it a red hot go, watch, learn, give it your all, and the more that you put in, the more you will get out of your first year of teaching as well.
Thanks. That's a lot of good advice. Thank you. And I just want to ask you now about finding employment, because obviously all of us are now, doing this course and we're studying to become teachers, most of us here. Because of COVID now, we know that COVID has had a huge impact on the TESOL sector, and we're concerned about the employment situation next year. Could you provide us with an update of what the situation is at your institutions and across the TESOL sector in general? And is there any advice you would give us in finding work?
Do you want me to talk? Because most of the attendees are looking from secondary sector. My sector is very niche, being in an independent school. That being said, though, there are, opportunities for EAL teachers, and, there are so many schools in the state that have EAL programs and EAL students. Given COVID and schools having tight budgets and those kinds of things, my advice is to really put the feelers out. Contact the schools that are in your area, send out your resume. I know that at Monash University, they have this great program where they send out, first year graduate resumes, but also you need to be proactive in that space as well and make connections, and keep your finger on the pulse on recruitment online. Independent schools, you need to be looking on their websites for employment opportunities. They still advertise in the newspapers, and also there is an independent schools job website where they also advertise positions as well.
Is that an independent schools, like it's a cumulative website where they all?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
A lot of independent schools will use that website. It's literally Independent Schools Jobs is the website.
Oh, okay.
You can Google it. A lot of schools will advertise also on Seek as well. Independent schools tend to use Seek, their HR departments, and they'll also go through recruiters as well. So people like ANZ UK, and get in touch with those people. They might be able to help you out as well.
Thank you, Julia. Laurence, you're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit depressing at the moment in the state secondary sector. We, as I work at a new arrivals school, and for obvious reasons, there aren't going to be many new arrivals for the foreseeable future. That said, we hope that in 6 to 12 months things will start returning to normal. And to add on to what Julia said, though, it's really important to be proactive. One little tip I think that is good, especially now when you might have a lot of people applying for fewer jobs, is to actually take your resume into the school that you're interested in. Ask for a tour, sort of so you can get your face known in the school. Shows that you're really keen. It's also a good opportunity to actually see the school yourself. Because if you get 100 people applying for one job, it can be very difficult for us at the school to pick the best applicants, to be honest. So if we've met you, it gives you a bit of a leg up.
Right. And what do you look for when in applications? What is the thing that stands out?
Oh, well, gosh, I'm not sure. It's hard to say. We look for a lot of things. Basically, you want especially difficult for a graduate because, you know, one thing is, you know, the way you've dealt with issues and the experiences you've had. And as a graduate, you may not have had as many. But you want to talk about actually things that you've done in class. In your case, for many of you, it might be in your placement time, problems you've faced and how you've actually dealt with them. So you want real examples. It's hard if you just write about, you know, all your knowledge, you know, of EAL, of theory. It doesn't tell us a lot about how actually you are as a teacher and what your strengths are as a teacher. So if you give us stories and experiences and how you've overcome things in your teaching, that's, I think, will help you again stand out a little bit.
And that would go on a key selection criteria document or something like that?
Yeah, there's always opportunity in the key selection criteria to add to sort of nuance it to how you want it to be and to your story. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Just to add to that, sorry, Rosemary, did you want to?
Yes, sorry. I was just thinking too, like as a graduate teacher, when I first came out, I did heaps and heaps of lots of CRT work at different schools. So for me, it was really good experience because obviously different schools operate, you know, differently. You gain a lot of experience by going and working in different grades and learning your craft. So my suggestion really to all graduates is to perhaps get as much CRT work as you possibly can before you even think of applying for jobs in schools. It stands you well for your future, I think.
And is there like a particular website or a portal that you go to enroll yourself as a CRT, or is it just by the school? Yeah, no,
Julia mentioned ANZ UK. They're an agency, so if you enroll yourself in with an agency, because many schools go through the agencies these days. I'm sure there are others around, but I know of ANZ UK. Send your resume to them and they will find you work, you know, when people are absent or on leave. And I think it's important to do that in the beginning.
Could I just say, from the adult sector, and I'm with Carringbush Adult Education, which is a not-for-profit community education provider. Whilst you know we've got very low immigration numbers right now, and hopefully they will improve, you know, there is still a lot of adults who have EAL requirements. So at our place, we've got our numbers are going really well. The students have responded really well to working remotely. We will continue delivering remotely or remotely in a blended way. In terms of accessing jobs, it's probably a little bit more a roundabout way for us. We would advertise on ethical jobs, and a lot of other community organisations would as well. I agree with what some of the other panellists have mentioned, and that is putting yourself forward. You need to demonstrate that you're the one. It's really important. If you get a whole bunch of applications, they can't all be successful. So there has to be a way for us to sift through. If we've seen you, if we've heard you, if you've shown an interest in working in our organisation, and you haven't, and it doesn't just look like it's a copy and paste job, and you've just sent it off to everybody. For me, that's really important. You actually want to work in our area. And as Laurence mentioned, to be able to show a little bit of insight that yes, we know that you've been studying and that you have knowledge, but what can you show? What can you show us about how you operate? Are you a learner? Are you willing to learn? You're lacking experience, so you need to show that you're really wanting to learn, and you know, and have some examples of how you've even mucked up and what you did when you were on your placement. I like to hear that. I like to hear what did you do? Something didn't work, and this is what you tried. It shows that you're going to be good to work with, and yeah.
Thanks. Okay, I'm sure that really helps all of us here. I just want to ask Margaret, because of with the adult sector, considering quite a few of us here now with the attendees also are studying primary or secondary teaching, are those qualifications enough for the adult sector, or do we need to do something else for that?
That's a good question. It depends. Quite often, and for our sector, you need to have a certificate 4 in training and assessment as well. So if you're interested in working in our sector, you can make contact. I'm happy for anyone to make contact with me to talk about that. Sometimes you can start work prior to having completed that, but really you do need to do it. It's a little bit strange, like it's a little bit of a square peg in a round hole. We sit in the vocational education sector. So we're education, but it's vocational. And so anybody who teaches in that sector needs to have a certificate 4 in training and assessment. It's actually really annoying, but it's something that has to be done. And we try to encourage people to do it with as minimal fuss as possible. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that question, Sanam.
Thanks for answering, Margaret. I'm going to now move on to the first year of teaching, which I think we all are dreading a bit. So what kind of support can graduate teachers like us expect in our first year of teaching from schools, our colleagues?
I'm happy to start that one. Laurence, were you going to start? No?
No.
Okay. In your first year of teaching at the primary level, all graduates are teamed up with a mentor teacher, so that guides them. At our particular school, we also have a second year mentoring program. So second year graduates also receive that support. First year teachers will get extra non-face-to-face teaching time for preparation or to meet up with their mentor, to just do other things that, as we all said, when you first start teaching, you're busily making resources or searching for resources. So you need a lot of time for preparation. So that's what we do here. We've got a first year mentor program and a second year mentor program. We also provide a really intensive induction for all our graduate teachers, and it runs over one full day before they actually start with us, and if they've applied for a job and they've been successful, and then it runs over I think for 6 weeks for the first part of the term, once a week, where we meet up for an hour with different area leaders or people with responsibilities, and the school organisation is explained to them in quite a lot of detail, and it's an opportunity for them to ask questions that just relate to them getting to know the school and what needs to be done in that first year. They'll get first year graduates could be also will be getting extra help for planning and unpacking the curriculum documents as well. So I know at our school level, at our school, we provide a lot of support for first year graduates to help them fit into that role. Yeah, I think that's about it, really. And if, for example, actually, that's one more thing. If, for example, your mentor teacher isn't in your area, you might then end up with a buddy who works in the same area as you, so that you can actually have someone to bounce ideas off really quickly. But there might, your mentor might come down and meet with you on a weekly basis, just look over your planning and just provide support in that way. So you're not on your own.
Thanks. Laurence, do you want to add to that?
Not really, no. Everything that I was going to say was said. So yeah, just an hour in place, and you will be given a little bit of extra time to plan, and you should be given a mentor.
Perfect, thank you. And what do you think are the kind of strengths that graduate teachers need to draw on to actually thrive in their first year of teaching?
I'll keep going, shall I? While I'm here.
Yeah, sure.
So I've thought about this a bit. I've got a little list. I think ask lots of questions. So you just keep learning. As Rosemary mentioned early on, if you can if you can observe teachers, do it. I always thought, you know, the actual placement part of my degree was the time I learned the most. And it's not uncommon that that's the last time a teacher will ever see another teacher teach. More and more now schools are opening up and there's a lot more collaboration and open classrooms, but in many schools that's still not part of the culture. So hopefully that might be a question you ask in your interview, whether that's part of the culture in the school, because I think it's important. A lot of teachers aren't comfortable still. But as I said, more and more are. Write lesson plans and reflect on them. You'll spend, as you move through your career, you'll probably stop writing lesson plans after a few years, but in your first year, write plans, work out what didn't work and why it didn't work, and actually then and there, reflect on it and write down why it didn't work and adapt your lesson plan there. It'll save you heaps of time down the line. Otherwise, you'll pick up your lesson plan again, you know, 6 months later and think you won't remember what worked and what didn't. So do that work, you know, straight away, and you'll thank yourself later because you'll save yourself a lot of time. Say no a lot. You're going to be asked as a young, energetic teacher, to take on lots of responsibilities. You have to learn to say no. It's okay to say no, and sometimes, you know, it can be difficult, especially if you're a young, energetic teacher. But if you say yes to everything, you'll be overburdened. Fake it till you make it. It's cliche, but you're going to be a little bit nervous going into your classroom at the beginning. And, you know, again, it's another cliche, kids can smell it sometimes. So just, you know, be confident, you know a lot, and you'll be fine. And another big one, I guess I could keep going for a while, but accept failure. You are going to, you know, you might spend hours on a lesson plan or a unit that you think is perfect, and then it will turn out to be a failure. That's okay, that's normal. Just make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that you reflect on it, adapt it. And, you know, I think it was mentioned, I think Marg mentioned earlier, maybe your bag of tricks and everything will increase as you become more experienced, and those failures will become less and less common. That said, you will never, ever stop learning, and you'll never, ever stop improving, which is one of the wonderful things about teaching. As I said, I could keep going, but I'll stop there.
Thanks, Laurence.
Can I add
Julia.
something? So this actually happened to me today, and I reflected on how you need to be really calm in a crisis and really adaptable. So I got timetabled in a terrible room today. The technology was all over the place. And one thing that I had to remind myself, and I think I've got better at this since I've become a mother, is being calm, because students will pick up your, you know, vibe. And so things will go wrong in your first year. You'll be timetabled in a different room, or your students won't show up, or, you know, you'll have left a really important resource that you need on your desk and you can't go back to get it because you have to supervise the kids. So it's about thinking on your feet and being calm in those tricky moments so that the kids don't sort of, go haywire because you're losing your mind.
Okay, stay calm. Yeah, thank you. It's interesting, Laurence, you mentioned saying no. And Margaret, when you were talking about your first year, you spoke about, you know, having to slow down and not get exhausted. And on that topic, we realized that self-care is a really important thing in this profession where burnout is common. So especially in the first 5 years of teaching, we do see a lot of teachers get stressed and overworked. How can we take care of ourselves mentally and physically during our first year?
Okay, I'll go again just for a little bit. Oh no, you go, Mark.
Oh, all right, I would just quickly. I think sort of a lot of these responses kind of overlap a bit, and I think it's making sure that you don't feel like you're on your own, that others are there, they're all going about their business. You know, talk to other people, talk to your team members. Maybe do some team teaching. You know, if you can sort of get a buddy, that can be really, really helpful, and you'll learn a lot. If that's the culture of the school, you'll have to suss that out, as we mentioned earlier. Observe others, build your confidence that way. I think if you keep to yourself, you're more likely to be stressed, you're more likely to worry, and perhaps you're more likely to magnify your problems and your fatigue. If you can sort of keep a little bit balanced and enjoy it, get to know some of the other staff members and all of that as well. There's sort of lots going on. Kind of enjoy it and know that it won't be smooth sailing all the time. It won't ever be. but almost enjoy that process and be able to learn, as Laurence suggested, oh, that lesson didn't go very well, or an element of it didn't go very well. Okay, what will I do next time? Okay, you know, and you'll have other ideas, and just sort of try to go with it rather than get too stuck and think, oh, I hate it, this is tiring, you know, there's going to be something better somewhere else.
Thank you. And Laurence, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, and as was mentioned, there's a bit of overlap, and something I guess I probably should have mentioned before. Another important thing, which could be a self-care thing or a strength, don't know, is assume positive intentions. It's easy to sort of get stuck in this mindset that people are out to get you. The timetable is giving you a bad room, or this kid doesn't like me, or and in most cases it's not true. So I think it's really important to assume positive intentions from the people you work with and from your students. More on a sort of more logistical side of self-care. Be strict with your time. I remember I worked with a teacher early on, and she said she never took work home. She just stayed at work until she'd finished, and then she went home and didn't think about work. So if that's, that might work for you. Other people, it might be, they do an hour or something, but carve out your time. You could literally spend 24/7 on planning your lessons and assessing and, thinking about it. You can't though. You'll go mad, you'll get exhausted. So carve out your time, work out what's realistic, and do what you can within those limits. And yeah, sleep.
Sleep, yeah. Thank you. That's some really good advice there. We're going to move on to now the actual teaching process. So one of our participants asked this question during registrations about building relationships with the EAL learners, and I think it was Julia. You mentioned don't make assumptions about your learners, your students, and just on that line, like, what are the kind of assumptions that we should be wary of, and what are the things that we should learn about our students?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's open to all of you.
There's a note there for Marg to talk to, so I don't want to double up on what Marg might say. I think that, it's really impossible to know what's going on in students' lives outside of the classroom because we don't see them in their homes. So one of the things that I found really powerful was that student voice, getting them to write about their experiences and bringing it in culturally and sensitively where appropriate. And I had a lot of students open up to me in my first years about their refugee experience, particularly the Somalian refugees. And I learned so much about their lives and their experiences because I'd never walked in their shoes before, and I hadn't been on those journeys that they'd been through. So the refugee journey is, incredibly, full-on journey. And you will take, I took a lot of that home in my first year as well, and reflected a lot on the type of teacher that I wanted to be. So, I worked with some incredible people, and we, talking through those issues and doing amazing PD, from people like Foundation House, and really educating myself about the refugee experience. And that would be my advice if you're working with refugee students, in contrast to new arrivals who are fully schooled, that, some PD in that area and speaking to your colleagues would go a long way.
Thank you. Margaret?
And yes, so could I just add, so I'm obviously working with adults, and so they have very, very complex lives. They come from incredible backgrounds. They're trying to parent often. It's really important with whichever students you have in front of you to get to know them. You're not really going to be able to get them doing their best learning unless you're aware of where they're coming from. What is it that's going to interest them? If what you're doing doesn't interest them because you haven't tapped into it, well, you're not going to get very far. So really, whoever you're teaching, it's really important to get to know where they're coming from, and some of the barriers that just might be making it tricky for them to engage on any given day. And often, if a student knows that you know something about them, you're going to get more from that student. Just a little tiny kernel of something is really, really important. They'll feel like they've made a connection with you. You're going to get better quality learning.
Thanks, Margaret. And Rosemary, would you like to add to that too? You're on mute.
I was clicking on the wrong button. I agree with everything that both Julia and Marg said. I think it's really, really important to get to know the culture. So understanding their journey, but also understanding their culture is quite important, and the language that they speak. And you know, I share the language that I speak with my students, and they share the language that they speak, and we teach each other little bits of phrases and whatnot, and we build a connection in that manner. So really understanding their culture and their language is another thing that's I think quite important for your students.
I just want to carry on from that, Rosemary, if it's okay. You just said including, you know, using their languages in the classroom. So how do we do that with EAL teaching and sort of strike a balance with, you know, having a plurilingual classroom, but also, you know, with incorporating it with teaching English? How do we do that effectively?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, one of the things that I do a lot in my classroom is have very informal conversations on a regular basis with my students. So we might start off the day where they come in and it's about them wanting to share information with what's happened outside of the classroom, at home or in their classroom. So when we're doing that, when we're having these informal conversations, they might say to me, oh, look, I don't have a word for it in English. So they might tell me the word in their language. Luckily, we've got Google now. We can do Google Translate. So we do all these sorts of things about translating or finding someone else. We've got the MEAs that can help us as well. So it opens up that sort of communication to understand what their language is and what the words of vocabulary means. And so it's not a matter of doing it in a formal setting where you're trying to learn the new language. It's more about saying, okay, there are ways that we say it in your language. These are the ways that we might say it in English. And you marry up the two, and they can see that both languages are really important to use. And if they get stuck on a word, that there are ways around it to find out. And because I speak Arabic, a lot of the children that I deal with are from Afghanistan, and so some of the vocabulary is really similar. So they actually get a real kick out of knowing that I know some of their vocabulary, and also knowing that in their language it might mean this, but in Arabic, so in Dari it has one meaning, but in Arabic it actually has a different meaning. So we have a bit of a giggle about that. And so, and I use their language a lot in terms of, we might be reading a shared book together. Only last week I was working with a whole lot of we had a group of new arrival students and their teacher's actually currently absent. So we were reading a book together, which was, I think, you know, quite dense. And I actually got them to retell it in their first language first. So I had one of the MEAs with me during that time. And so we actually read the book in English, obviously in English, and, you know, worked on the vocabulary and definitions of the vocabulary. And then I actually got them to retell it in their first language. And then if they felt comfortable, they had a go at telling it in English. So I wanted them to see that they could still be learning English, but it didn't matter if they weren't using English in the beginning. I wanted them to feel comfortable so that they would participate in the activity and enjoy the actual text. So it's a little bit about, yeah, it's a little balance, really, knowing when to use their language and when to hold back and just concentrate on English. There's no formal way of doing it. Well, for me, there isn't. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just on that note of, you know, plurilingualism, and it's now also part of the new Victorian EAL curriculum. Yeah. So for us new graduate teachers, what are some of the things that we should focus on in the curriculum, and how can we get more support understanding the new curriculum? It's open to anyone here.
I'm happy to talk about that. I spent a bit of time on developing the curriculum with some of the creators. There is a lot of resources on the department's website, and particularly the VCAA's website, and I would encourage everybody to go and check those out, particularly the video recorded webinars that the VCA ran and the department, the EAL division at the department ran as well. They're incredibly informative. Some of them are pitched to people that are in my position in terms of like curriculum heads and implementing curriculums in schools. So that might be, you know, a little bit technical there, but there are some really great sessions on just unpacking the curriculum as well. So everything is online and everything is accessible there. What I would encourage you to do is, familiarize yourself with the new curriculum and look at the stages as well for learners, particularly in secondary, you know, the C stage, the learner pathways, and get yourself familiar with the curriculum and what, you know, the courses, you know, the progression of languages are and the domains and the areas that we're going to be looking at. I'm in a bit of a unique situation in my school, being in the independent sector, that we are not beholden to implement it. So we're actually looking at ways in which we can take, you know, aspects of the curriculum into our own curriculum, but we won't be fully implementing it at this stage. And if you want me to talk about plurilingualism as well, again, I've got some notes on that. I can talk to that again.
Yes, please.
Do you want me to do that now?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So I did a little bit of research, and I'm, you know, very much, you know, a proponent of Julie Choi and Sue Ollerhead's work. So what I would encourage you to do is to familiarize yourself with Julie and Sue's work, which is pluralism. Their book, they wrote the book on this, plurilingualism in teaching and learning. So I would, familiarize yourself with that. And also on the Education Department's website for EAL, there is a fantastic resource there called EALD Learners Are Plurilingual. So that's available on the DET website. And so basically it unpacks the definition of plurilingualism, explains that, you know, what it involves, and that it's a set of different linguistic skills that a person can use in order to learn and communicate. And Rosemary really unpacked a lot of, you know, those techniques and things that we can do in the classroom. So that plurilingual approach to EALD pedagogy, where learners are using more than one language in many aspects of their life and in their learning as well. So it's not an input pedagogy. It's really about facilitating language learning through their home language as well. So an example of that would be something that I get my older students to do when they're preparing to give oral presentations, is to actually give the oral presentation in their home language and unpack the strategies that they used to deliver a confident and persuasive style oral presentation. And it's the same techniques and same skills that they need to employ in English. So that's at a senior, more advanced level. But really, you know, focusing on those meta-linguistic skills. So the ability to think and discuss language and bringing in knowledge of their language where possible. You don't have to learn your students' languages, but there is a resource that I would recommend, which is fantastic. And I often pull that out when we get learners from different languages in our school. So we had a Russian speaker from Kyrgyzstan at our school a couple of years ago. And Learner English by Michael Swan and Bernard Smith is a really great resource, because it has chapters on many different languages that unpack the syntactical and phonological differences between English and those languages. So you can get yourself a little bit familiar, and then you start to realize, okay, Chinese students don't use articles, and that's why they're not using them in their writing and those kinds of things. So I would encourage you to check that one out.
Thanks, Julia. And Julia, I'm just going to build on that. So I think a lot of the stuff that you mentioned just now, the resources tie into, you mentioned that it would support them in English too. And I think that was one of the questions we had, that how do we support our EAL students in the mainstream subjects, especially at the VCE level, you know, when it's high stakes?
At the VCE level, if you're teaching VCE EAL, you are very curriculum driven. You're working towards your outcomes, you're working towards your SACs, and you're working towards that exam at the end of year 12. So it's very challenging to incorporate sort of, you know, cross-domain support at the VCE level, but it can be done in terms of making sure that you get to know your faculty heads, you know, talking about the language, getting to know what subjects your students are taking, and encouraging the students to, you know, learn the language and the vocabulary of their subjects, because not all mainstream domain teachers are going to be, you know, proficient in teaching EAL learners the language of their subjects. So it's about giving your EAL learners the skills to create vocab lists. I've got some great teachers. I'm very lucky at my school. So my biology teacher will provide multilingual glossaries where she can, but not all teachers will do that. So you need to teach your students how to do that and the study skills they need to learn the language of their subjects. If they've come through the middle years, and they have been included, hopefully every school is different, but if they've got a middle years EAL program, so it's really important that if you're teaching in the middle years EAL sphere and you're teaching to the new curriculum, that the new curriculum is really foundational in terms of helping students and teaching skills that the language skills they need cross-disciplinary. So again, it's about learning the language that they need to be confident across the domains, and also that learning those study skills to acquire the language of their subject. So if you're in a support role in a school, spending time outside of the EAL or the English classroom and going to the science classes, going to the maths classes, getting the curriculum documents, getting your head around all of that, language, particularly as we know at the, the more language dense areas. So your humanities subjects, your geography, your geographies. Like we do a lot of work around preparing students for their assessment tasks, particularly in history and those really, language dense subjects. And they do need support. So depending on the support structures that you have, in your school, if you can offer one-to-one support, small group, work, lunch times, after schools, it really depends on the access that you are given to the students. And really getting to know the teachers outside of your faculty and those supports. So sometimes as an EAL teacher, you can be put in a school and they want you to cover everything. You've got to go and get all that stuff. It's a lot of work, but to the benefit of the students' language processing abilities and, preparing for those specific texts that they have to write across their domains.
Right. Thanks, Julia. Laurence, next question's for you. So since we were talking about language and the features of language, functional grammar, how does that work?
Okay.
How is that taught?
I'm going to now demonstrate bad teaching by trying to explain this way too quickly. But functional grammar is a type of grammar that we use at the Western English Language School at Wells, and we train all our teachers in its use. And I'm actually just going to do a little lesson that would normally take much longer than this. But I'm going to try and do it in a couple of minutes with you guys. So I'm just going to present to you a slide. I assume you can all see that now. Can you see it, Sanam?
Yes, we can.
Yep. So in the actual activity, in this activity, normally you'd be at your table, you'd have all these words cut up in front of you with a group, and I'd say, can you put this together to make a sentence? And after about 10 or 15 minutes, you would come up with a sentence. We don't have time for that today, but the way you do it is by the fact that you know how words go together, you know how language works. So you might see, I'll point out some clues. You see even, and you say though, and you can put those together to make even though. And you might think, you could talk. Maybe we're talking about the water or the cool water. So we understand how language works, and we can put it together. And eventually, you could create this sentence with those words. Even though the water looked cool and inviting, the poisonous water snakes prevented any swimming that day. And you can look at it from a traditional grammar perspective, and this isn't that traditional grammar is bad and functional grammar is good. They're just different. But if you were to look at it from a traditional grammar perspective, and Julia, I know you're an expert, so I hope I've got all this right. I think you come up with even though as a conjunction. You've got a determiner, you've got a noun, you've got a verb, you've got an adjective, you've got a conjunction, an adjective. So these are words that it's a meta language that we can teach students, and we often do teach students. Although not, when I was at school, I certainly wasn't taught this stuff, but my parents were. Comes and goes. So that's a traditional grammar sort of perspective. Now we look at the same sentence through a functional grammar lens. And the nice thing I think about functional grammar, especially with English language learners, and you can do this with kids at, for want of a better word, at really low levels, or kids who don't have much English, is you ask questions about the language, and the answers give you sort of ideas about what they are. So I'll start with even though as a conjunction, And then I might ask, what are the verbs? You'll see two verbs in this sentence. They are looked and prevented. In functional grammar, they're called processes, but they're the same thing. And then you can ask some questions. I could say, what looked cool and inviting? And hopefully you would say to yourself, the water. And in functional grammar, we call this noun group the participant. And again, I'm not going to go into all the names too much here, but we know that from that question that the and water go together. It's the water looked cool and inviting. Similarly, I could ask you, what prevented any swimming that day? And you would know that it is the poisonous water snakes. It's not just snakes, it's not water snakes, it's not poisonous water snakes, it's the poisonous water snakes. And that noun group is working together as one participant. How did the water look? It looked cool and inviting. And what did the water snakes, the poisonous water snakes, prevent? They prevented any swimming. Another participant, another noun group. And when did the poisonous water snakes prevent any swimming? That day. We call that a circumstance. Circumstances talk about when or where or how. So this is called a transitivity activity, and there's color coding that you can see, which I've used here. And this is a really powerful way to help students understand how the language is actually functioning. And that's why it's called functional grammar, because the words are functioning together in this way. And you can do all sorts of fantastic activities with colored blocks and things, where you give a kid a red block and a green block and a blue block, and you change the order, and they have to make sentences that fit that order using participants, processes, and circumstances. And it goes all the way up, and you can spend a whole lot of time on noun groups. You can spend a whole lot of time on processes, a whole lot of time on circumstances. They're all really important parts, and conjunctions, of course, of creating language. So that's one part of functional grammar. I'm quickly going to show you another part, which is called the register, and the register is made up of the field, the tenor, and the mode. You've got this short sentence here, they beat him. Field talks about the topic, whether it's familiar, what the subject is, whether you're using specialized vocabulary, and you can adjust this. You can think of it as a lever. You can make it sort of more specialized, less familiar. In this case, it's very familiar and not specialized. You can adjust the tenor, which is the relationship between the speaker and the audience. Again, they beat him, pretty relaxed. I'm speaking to you now in quite a relaxed way, but not like I would to my friend. So it's a little bit more formal. And the mode is whether a text is spoken like or written like. Again, they beat him is pretty spoken like. The way I'm speaking to you now is very spoken like. Then you can adjust all that, and you can create a sentence that says the coalition defeated Napoleon at Leipzig, precipitating his fall from power and eventual abdication on the 6th of April, 1814. These sentences are about the same thing, you could say. You can imagine the one above is a couple of kids in class talking about this very incident. The one below is something I stole from Wikipedia, but it's much more formal. It's much more written like. It's got a lot of specialized vocabulary, and the subject is clearly history. And what we need to, and it's not that one is better than the other. It's not that the bottom one is better than the top one. It's about teaching kids how to move between these, when it's appropriate to use one and when it's appropriate to use the other. It's about the culture, it's about the situation, and giving kids the power and the knowledge to adjust those levers to basically get what they want when they're talking. When they're making a transaction, that's what conversation is about. It's a transaction, and you need to give kids the tools they need to successfully have those transactions using language. So that's really quick. That should have taken me hours. I've included a couple of articles that I think would help, and I hope that I'll be able to. I think I'll be actually doing a VicTESOL presentation in more detail on that in the future with some colleagues. So watch this space.
Great. I was actually just going to ask, how do we learn more about it? So yeah, that'll be really nice. Looking forward to that. Margaret, there's one more question for you before we move on to the participant questions. So we've been looking at primary school, secondary school mostly, but what is the kind of EAL support? I know you spoke about this a bit about the kind of EAL support that's offered to adults, but at a community level, what is the kind of support? What are the kind of courses and options that adults have in this sector? You're on mute, Margaret.
Sorry, for beginning teachers, do you mean? Or what are the courses?
Overall, just beginning teachers and even later.
Oh, okay. So sorry, do you mean professional learning?
Not just professional learning, but actually within the EAL sector, what are the different kind of courses, the supports, the kind of things that adults would be expected to learn and that we could be involved in teaching then?
So it's actually quite sort of a complex area. There are federally funded programs. You might have heard of AMEP and the Skills for Education and Employment. There are state government funded programs with accredited and pre-accredited training. And then there are some of the university preparation courses as well. So there are all of those things going on. In our centre, we deliver up to Certificate 3 in English as an additional language. And then we also deliver some wraparound supports and pathways programs to support learners to move into vocational training and employment. So in the community education space, that's the sort of work that we do. Looking at the whole person is important to us. It's not just sort of delivering English as an additional language, even though that is important. The wraparound supports go with that as well. And so anybody who comes to work with us, you'd be involved in teaching adults at a level that has been determined through a pre-training assessment, and that's what you'd be learning. And then some of the supports that you would get would be similar to what the others have described that happens in schools. We have an induction program and mentoring, and very keen to have a culture of observations and team teaching where possible.
Thanks, Margaret. And last question from me is to all of you. So what is the one resource that you would recommend every EAL teacher should have? So yeah, anything that you think is the one thing that we should take with us.
I think it's that learner English for me. When I was able to really, I love grammar, as Laurence said before, I'm a bit of a grammar nut. And when I could, and being a bilingual myself, and when I had fantastic grammar teachers and language teachers when I was in school, and when I could understand the structural components of my students' language better, I felt that I became a better teacher. That's just my perspective.
Thanks, Julia. And Rosemary, would you want to add to that?
Yeah, no worries. I have provided a resource list. I'm not sure how we can see that, which has some really good resources for the teaching of reading, because I think in part of the question people wanted to know about resources.
More about, yeah, reading and pronunciation.
Yeah. So I've got, I think I've listed a few there by Sheena Cameron, which I think are really, really great resources to use. There's a couple of other books about, that I've listed other resources about just teaching EAL in the mainstream. Are we able to pull it up at all?
I think Kali's just posted a link to it right now. Yeah, she's just put it on the chat.
Oh, under chat.
I can try pulling it up, and
yeah, I seem to, yeah, I'm looking at the chat, but I can't seem to see. And I think there were a couple of other.
I've got it open. I'll just share my screen and you could.
Is that okay? Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Can you see that?
I seem to have disappeared off the screen. I'm sorry, I'm having some sort of technical difficulty here.
We can still see you, Rosemary.
Oh, you can still see me? Thank you.
Yeah.
I can't see anyone at the moment.
Can you see my screen though?
I've just got a Zoom phone expanding your reach. No? Oh, yes, now I can. Sorry, something clicked up there. So as you can see there, there's just, I'm not going to go through them all, but I've just listed a number of resources, and I just took the blurb from the back of the book to give a simple description about them. But I find that all of those resources are really, really helpful for reading, for teaching, phonemic awareness and phonics. And also there's a couple of websites that I sometimes go to that have got some really, they're not, one's in a British one, the Bell Foundation, and I think the one above that, sorry.
Is that, yeah?
Yeah, are you able to scroll down a little bit for me, please?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, oh, the Reading Rockets is a American website. I have found them to be quite useful for picking up ideas and just even professional reading. They've got some really good, information on there for new teachers. So if anybody's interested in perhaps any other type of resources in terms of writing, or just for professional reading, feel free to send me an email and I can send some other resources through. Some other, yeah, sorry.
The link's in the chat. So if for everyone who's attending, if you just want to open this up, there are links in this on this webpage to all the resources there. I'm going to just stop sharing my screen and I'll pass this over to Shem now, just to take on a few of the questions from the attendees. Shem, would you want to?
Thanks, Sanam. Look, actually, I think we might have to, unfortunately, we're going to have to skip the questions because it's already after 5 and we've scheduled to go to 5. So we don't want to take up too much of everyone's time at this point. But thank you for those people who have contributing a number of questions in the Q&A. We'll perhaps consider how we might respond to those in the resource that we've made available on the EAL, on the VicTESOL website. And there's been up in the chat there with various resources, and perhaps we'll add those to the page that we will have on the VicTESOL website as well, so that you can access those and find all those things in one spot. So I'd like to just take this opportunity to thank the panelists and our host, Sanam, for hosting today. Thank you to Laurence, to Rosemary, to Marg and to Julia for your really, really insightful and valuable comments. I found it really interesting, exciting and inspiring to hear all the things that your collective knowledge and wisdom about what graduate students need to be able to do well in their first year in graduating. So thank you so much to everybody on the panel. I think it's been a fabulous session today. If you'd like to show your appreciation, you can use the clap icon if it's available, or just put your thanks in the chat to the participants. So I'd like to thank David Kazelis and Carly for their work behind the scenes in getting this session running. They've done some fabulous work in organising this. As you can imagine, it takes quite a bit to do. So thank you to all concerned, and I'd like to, and thank you to the participants for coming along today. I'd like to hand over to David now, who's going to give you a little bit more information about things that are following.
Thanks, Shem. Yeah, just a quick few things just to wrap up. In the chat function, we put a lot of different links during the session. One of them is to our upcoming VicTESOL Professional Learning, which we'd love to see you at. We have a couple more events scheduled for November. The first one, Jackie Springle is presenting on pronunciation, and also Luke Treadwell and Tanya Luskovsky are presenting on remote learning in the adult sector. Both of these events are for specifically for adult sector teachers, but everybody is welcome, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot no matter what sector you're in. So we've got a couple of events there, so if you want to click on that link, that'd be great. Shem mentioned the survey. We'd love you to complete the survey. In the survey, there's the usual sort of questions you'd expect after this type of event. There's also the last question is asking for graduate EAL teachers. So next year we've got a project that we are planning in which we sort of follow the journey, I suppose, of graduate EAL teachers as they embark upon their first year and throughout that year. It's question number 10 in the survey. If you'd like to be involved in that, we'd love to hear from you. You just leave your name and your email and we'll contact you. That'd be great. Also, just to mention that student membership to VicTESOL is free, and so is in your first year. So for all the period that you're studying and for the first year of teaching, it's free. There's heaps of resources on our website, past webinars like this one. So if you want to sign up, I've put the link in the chat function, or you can just go to our website, VicTESOL website. Yeah, last thing, just if you want to say thank you now to the panel or to Sanam for hosting, please do so in the chat function. And we hope to see you at another event in the near future. Thank you, everyone.